We'll be looking at 1 Samuel for a couple weeks now. Really, 1 Samuel is a book about contrasting characters. So at the beginning of the book, it contrasts the priests, such as Eli and his sons, with the judge Samuel. And this kind of contrasts those two characters. And then later on in the book, it becomes a contrast between David and Saul. So let's start this off. We're not actually going to look per se at either David or Saul. We're going to spend most of our, pretty much all of our time today looking at the idea of the kingship itself. So just so that we're all on the same page, it started out way back in Exodus and Genesis 2. God saves a people who are in slavery in Egypt. Okay, He adopts them as His own. They are His chosen people. He makes a covenant with them to bless them. So most of us are aware of this. A covenant basically is an agreement between God and Him and God and the people. This is something that is very singular to the Jews. It has never before happened or since happened with a single ethnic group where a god of any sort, whether it be Yahweh or any other god, made a covenant with the people. So, a very, very significant thing that happens. And so you would think that they would be just ecstatic and very obedient and just joyful in all things, but that's not how it goes, actually. And the rest of the Bible just tells us a sad story of basically Israel not really wanting to do what God was trying to get them to do. So they go back and forth between obeying God and disobeying God. And then we get to the book of Judges, where there's this very obvious repetition. This very, what's the right word? Where you can just see that it's coming. They disobey God, and so then they get themselves in a pickle where God judges them. Things don't go well. There's invaders that come in. They lose their crops. Bad things happen. And so then they, you know what, God, our bad. We're sorry. Please forgive us. And then God sends a hero, also called a judge, and they get out of the pickle, and everything's all good for a little while, and then the cycle repeats itself. All throughout the book, this thing happens. And the very last judge of Israel is a man by the name of Samuel. And this is actually where the story is going to pick up today. 1 Samuel 8, 1-9 says this: When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges over Israel. His firstborn son's name was Joel, and his second was Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. However, his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned toward dishonest profit, took bribes, and perverted justice. For those of you who read through the Bible with us, you'll remember this is not unlike Eli's sons were doing. There's once again a contrast happening there between the righteous and the wicked and their offspring. So anyways, moving on. If you did not read that, don't worry about it. Just go read 1 Samuel. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and went to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "Look, you are old." Thanks, guys. I already knew that. I got my own mirror here. And your sons do not walk in your ways. Therefore, appoint a king to judge us the same as all the other nations have. When they said, "Give us a king to judge us," Samuel considered their demand wrong, so he prayed to the Lord. Notice there, it doesn't say one way or another at this point whether their request was wrong. It just says that Samuel saw it as wrong. Okay, so let's kind of move on and see what happens. But the Lord told him, now God's going to weigh in on this. Listen to the people and everything they say to you. They have not rejected you, they have rejected me as their king. It's at this point that God actually weighs in on the argument. They are doing the same thing to you that they have done to me since the day I brought them out of Egypt, until this very day today, abandoning me and worshiping other gods. Listen to them, but solemnly warn them and tell them about the customary rights of the king who will reign over them. So they asked for a king, and there's a lot of pros and cons to having a king. I've made a little chart that I think gets the point across fairly well. On the pros side, they would have stability as a nation. They would have unity between the tribes. They would have protection, obviously. They were a lot more on their own without a king. They would have structure. That's absolutely important for leadership and raising up new leaders, very important thing. And they would be streamlining to the systems of the world. So that seemed like a better option. But then you have the cons on the other side, and these are many. And he goes through, and we're not going to read all of them, but this is just a summary of all the things Samuel warns them about with the king. They're going to draft their kids into war and into service. The king will rule as a lord, in which case he will just kind of, lord it over you. Taxing is going to be something that they're always going to worry about now. And the eminent domain, that's the ability of the king to just come in and take as he sees fit. So this is something that is going to happen there. And then also there's going to be the issue that he's going to overwork them and overcharge them. These are all things we see that actually do happen. So there's a lot of pros and cons, but what did it matter? Here's the big question that I feel like we don't ask at this point in 1 Samuel a lot of the times for those of us who grew up reading the book. What does it really matter that they asked for a king? And I think a question is a little bit hard. A question is a little bit hard to answer at this point. So let's kind of take it apart. First off, was it wrong for them to have a king or to ask for a king? See, this is the part that gets us, because right away we think, well, yes, surely it was wrong for them to have a king because of Samuel and God's reaction in 1 Samuel. But let's go back and look at what the law actually says. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, take possession of it, live in it, and say, I will set a king over me like all the nations around me. Well, this is this is exactly what he just said. This is very reminiscent. You are to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. Okay, so God's going to have a say in who they pick. They can't just pick anybody, okay? Appoint a king from your brothers, so they had to be Israelite. You are not to set a foreigner over you, or one who is not of your people. However, he must not acquire many horses for himself, or send the people back to Egypt to acquire many horses. For the Lord has told you, you are never to go back that way again, which is something that Solomon actually does. All these things that they're going to warn about in Deuteronomy, Solomon does. All of them. Because he's smart enough and he's wise enough to know what's better for the nation, right? He must not acquire many wives for himself so that his heart won't go astray. He must not acquire very large amounts of silver and gold for himself. When he is seated on his royal throne, he is to write a copy of this instruction for himself on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priest. So there's a very interesting thing happening here. We like rules for the sake of rules, right? And I'm not saying that they're wrong. Right? Like, so most of us are going to say, hey, you shouldn't have more than one wife. I hope we're all going to say that. But, hear what I'm saying, very rarely do we get to the point of the discussion and say, why? Why shouldn't you have more than one wife? You know, obviously we all have our own reasons, and I'm not saying it's wrong. And what I'm saying here is that in the law, it doesn't just say, hey, make sure they don't do this. It gives specific reasons for what it's saying. Don't let him get a bunch of wives because his heart is going to be led astray. It's very important that you listen to me on this. So they didn't listen to him. It is to remain with him, and he is to read from it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to observe all the words of this instruction, and to do these statutes. Then his heart will not be exalted above his countrymen. He will not turn from this command to the right or to the left, and he and his sons will continue reigning many years in Israel. Or you can hop back into the book of Genesis, where Israel is getting ready to die. And before he dies, he gives a little prophecy about each one of his children. And this is what he says about Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah, or the ruling, or the staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is comes, and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him. Foreshadowing Jesus. So a very important thing here, when you look back at the law, you see without fail that the law did say that they were going to have a king. And furthermore, it never once said that this was a negative thing. The law never portrays having a king as a negative thing. But yet here in 1 Samuel, something's not good with this. And let's just kind of very quickly go through 1 Samuel, just some selected parts of it, to show that in 1 Samuel, yes, in fact, kingship is shown as negative. Even though the primary reason for Judges being written was to argue for the need of a king. Yet here we are, the very last judge, and we're shown that it's a bad thing. So what's happening here? Let's look through. Samuel told all the Lord's words to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These are the rights of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and put them to his use in his chariots, and his horses are running in front of his chariots. And he goes on there for quite a bit. We're not going to read all of it. But you can see there it's pretty negative. Hop down to verse 18. When that day comes, you will cry out because of the king you've chosen for yourselves, but the Lord won't answer you on that day. It's very interesting the way he worded that, though, isn't it? Because the law said that God was supposed to be the one who picked the king, right? And later, it's going to be God that picks Saul, not the people. And yet here in Samuel, he says very clearly, you will cry out because of the king you've chosen for yourselves. So there's two things that this applies to. First off, let me come back to that. First off, when the kingdom divided, the northern kingdom of Israel appointed kings based on their own whims. So this is foreshadowing that eventual reality. But then the second thing is something that we're going to actually look at about why it was wrong for them to ask for the king. And we're not going to answer that just yet. Just remember that we're going to answer it, and we'll keep on going from here. The people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we must have a king over us. We have to. We need this. Then we'll be like all the other nations. Our king will judge us, go out before us, and fight our battles. And it sounds like the way that they're wording that might be wrong, but it was also the exact same wording that they said in Deuteronomy, so maybe it wasn't wrong. 21, Samuel listened to all the people's words and then repeated them to the Lord, as though God didn't hear, right? Verse 22, listen to them, the Lord told Samuel. This is now the second time that God is telling Samuel to listen to them. Appoint a king for them. Then Samuel told the men of Israel, each of you go back to your city. I like Samuel because he's a guy that pouts. Okay, God tells him, go ahead and appoint. So he sends them all home. He's going to pout for a little bit. And then later, when Saul disobeys and loses the kingship, he goes and pouts again. And God actually comes to him again and says, how long are you going to sit around moping for Saul? Get up, go. I really, really relate to that. I feel like Saul is probably the person I relate to most. Today you have rejected your God. This is down in chapter 10. This is 2 chapters later. Today you have rejected your God who saves you from all your troubles and afflictions. Keep in mind, if memory serves correctly, King Saul has already been anointed as king at this point. So he's sitting there listening to them say this. That's got to be an ego boost, right? You said to him, you must set a king over us. Now, therefore, present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans. And then you hop down 2 chapters later. They pleaded with Samuel, pray to the Lord your God for your servants so we won't die. For we have added to all our sins the evil of requesting a king for ourselves. Okay, so was it wrong for them to have a king? No, but definitely here in 1 Samuel it is wrong. So what's the deal? Well, I think we can summarize the problem with 3 statements. Israel's sin, first off, their motive was wrong. It was wrong for them to have a king because their motive behind having a king was wrong. The motive is like why you do things. Hey, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to go do this. Why? Why are you going to do that? Well, when I vote, I'm going to vote this way. Okay, that's fine. Why are you going to vote that way? It's the reason behind the thing that you're doing, your motive. In 8:5, and I'll read it again here, it says, they said to him, look, you are old, and your just keep bringing it up, don't you? And your sons do not walk in your ways. Therefore, appoint a king to judge us, the same as all the other nations have. But all the other nations didn't have a righteous king. All the other nations didn't have a righteous king. They never once in this process stopped to ask, well, what does God want in all this? That wasn't really their concern at all. They never asked what God wanted. I remember, I'm sure many of you guys can relate to this. When I was younger, never mind how much younger, it doesn't matter. Much like it doesn't matter for you how much younger, it doesn't matter. We're not going to bring it up. I remember when I was younger shopping, and I would see a toy, and I needed that toy. Like, you don't know, okay? You don't know, but let me tell you, I needed it. It wasn't something I wanted. No, this was a need. It was a need. Much like, never mind, I'm not going to say that. Just in case. I don't know. Well, I'll go ahead and say it just as a joke. But I have to say that it is a joke. I don't know what phones you have, okay? I'm just saying it's a joke. Don't stone me, okay? Much like people got with the iPhones, with the whole paying hundreds of dollars in monthly payments. Oh, my goodness. I remember back in the good old days when you had those flip phones that were virtually indestructible, and they cost like what, $15 or so? I don't even know, but it wasn't a big deal if you broke it. Anyways, then those, what are they called, Nokias, the bricks, and you would put them in those carrying cases. Which, didn't that seem a little bit redundant? Having a brick and then putting it in a carrying case, like, why? It's not going to break. The only thing that's going to happen is going to break the tile when it drops, and it's going to break your toe when it drops on it. Anyways, it doesn't matter. But I needed the toy. I really, really, really needed the toy. And then, after I got it, exactly what you already know is going to happen. The new wore off. And then it wasn't so great. And I started to look at all the other toys and second-guess myself. Maybe I was wrong. I should have gotten that toy. That's the one I need. If only they had some sort of rental toy system where you could try it out for a couple weeks and then, kind of like a library, but with toys instead of books. Perfect, man. It would have been perfect for me as a kid. And even as adults, we do this, right? We do this with cars. We do it with houses. I need this to be happy. I need it. I need to be in this relationship. I need to have this drill, which, now hold on. You probably do need that drill to be happy. But, but that's something else. And teenagers deal with this a lot, too. They want to dress and act like everybody else. They don't want to be different. They don't want to stand out. They want to just kind of be like everybody else. And when we get older, we do the exact same thing. Now, there's nothing wrong with moving per se, okay? So if you are considering moving, I'm not attacking anybody here. It's just an example I have seen in my life. Where as we get older, we want to move for various reasons. Sometimes we have no reason. We just get bored and we want to move. Sometimes it's because we think that if we move to that place, we're going to be happy. Sometimes we think that if we move, that we can be in better competition with somebody else. Like, my house right now isn't very great, but if I move to that house, then I'm going to be the envy. And there's a lot of different reasons why people do it, but a lot of times we just get bored, and so I'm going to move. Okay, what do you plan to do there? I have no idea. No idea. I mean, I'm reminded back when I went to college. Why do you want to go to that college? I don't know. Did you think overly that much about what stuff that you were doing as a kid? I know I didn't. And some of it, I guess, I came to regret, but that's neither here nor there. But a better question that should have been asked, I think, in all those situations, in my case at least, was, does God want me to move? What school does God want me at? And you don't have to get weird about this, right? God, if you want me to be at this church, that it would land on the top. Yes. It's not, we're not talking about getting weird about it, okay? We're not looking for all kinds of signs of mysticalism. But there should be a prayer in the conversation somewhere. Should I buy this? Should I do that? Your money really is a gift from God. We get into the thinking of, I've been successful, I've planned well, I've been wise. And God opened the doors for you, you walked through them, and then he prevented the loss of the money in all those situations. I'm telling you, there's so many times that I have failed, and do you guys ever do this? Completely failed to notice God's blessing on your life. And then you get down the road and you look back, when you're complaining about how hard you have it, and you look back and you realize all those times it was God working behind the scenes, and you totally missed it. Totally missed it. You thought it was your own smarts, your own wisdom, your own prowess. It's not, though. It's not. God, do you really want me to? What do you want, God? And obviously there's nothing wrong with choosing and making choices and that kind of stuff. But here's the thing I'm trying to get about this. This is why it's significant that they never ask God's input about the king. If your motive is bad, your choice is bad. We are people who always look at the end game. The ends justify the means, right? Well, God doesn't really work like that. He's very much so more concerned about the means than the ends. Well, if I do this, financially I'll be ahead. And the whole time God's saying, well, that's pretty corrupt if you do that. You shouldn't do that. But my success depends on it, God. If your motive is bad, your choice is bad. So asking for things in prayer, that's not bad, okay? I don't want you to walk away from this thinking, being paranoid. We're like, I'm afraid to ask for something because what if it's me instead of God? That's not what I'm getting at all, okay? So Move forward. The second thing that was evidently wrong in 1 Samuel that they were doing was their timing was wrong. Their timing was wrong. It was God's will for them to have a king, but not at this point. Not at this point. God very much so was not opposed to a king. But the timing wasn't his, the timing was theirs. And do you ever find yourself doing this where you think you have to do something right now, right? You think God has to answer a prayer right now. It's got to happen right now. God, there's a time crunch here, God. If you don't do this, then this is going to happen, and then this. We are already 15 steps ahead. And meanwhile, God's like, calm down. You don't even know what's going to happen in this situation. How in the world are you going to handle 15 steps ahead? Well, that's kind of what's happening here. They think they thought they had to do something. It had to be right now. And we convince ourselves that it's good. We convince ourselves that we need it. And we get in a rush. We get impatient. What did it matter if I left the toy, thought about it for a couple days, and then came back and bought it then? Did it matter? No. But as a child it did. Because maybe they'll all sell out. You don't know. Maybe this will be the last toy ever made that's like this. It's the perfect thing, and it could never exist again. Which we do the same thing as adults. I have to get this house. I have to get this car. I have to get... I was talking to a realtor one time, and they were talking about... This was a number of years ago, when I bought my first house. And they were talking about the way, don't fall in love with the house as soon as you see it. Look at it, weigh its pros and cons, think about it, and then, after you've gotten a couple different ideas, buy the one that's right for you. But don't fall in love with it, because then they're going to rip you off, and they're going to make you pay more for the house than it's worth. Don't fall in love with it. And I thought, I know. But do you know that advice was surprisingly well, because it doesn't just apply to houses, it applies to a lot of things in life. Really a lot of things in life. Toys included. How about that? So we get in a rush. Which brings us to another very interesting point. If it is good, if the thing is good, but the timing is bad, the thing is bad. If it's not the right timing, it's not good. And we do this with a number of things. There were some kind of stories that I could tell, but I don't want to, in this case, get too into the stories. But I'll just kind of gloss over them. There was a person who was wanting healing, and they thought that if God didn't heal them right now, that it was the end of the road, that, everything else was just going to fall apart. And God didn't heal them, and it didn't fall apart, but they did still get mad and got mad at God and stopped going to church and kind of pouted for a number of years. I don't know whatever happened to them. I kind of lost contact with them. But it got to be one of those things where, well, God, I need this, and I need it right now, and surely it is God's will for me to be healed, right? So it has to happen right now. Well, surprise, surprise, God didn't work that same time frame. And spirit filling, this is another thing that people do. You'll pray to be filled with the Holy Spirit and pray, and it doesn't happen, and you think, oh, it must not be God's will for it to happen. But sometimes God will withhold his Spirit from a church for a time as he works in them. And sometimes he'll do a work in you before he brings the baptism of the Holy Spirit. That happens. God doesn't work on our time frame. Now, I don't know why he does the things that he does. I have no idea. But I know that many times he does those things. I mean, it's his own choice why he does them. I don't have anything to say about that. Prayer is another thing. We go to God in prayer, and he doesn't answer in the way or the time that we want. And so we get all kinds of impatient and bent out of shape. But God, we needed this answer now. Purchases. Have to make this purchase right now. Decision. And here's just a little thing here. If you are constantly finding yourself in a place of debt, okay? I know you don't want the pastor talking about money. Just hear me out, okay? If you're finding yourself always in a place of debt, chances are it's because of your lack of self-discipline and control. Chances are. Your life wasn't meant to be lived in debt. And if there's something where it's consistently happening, that should be a red flag in your life. Ask yourself, is there something going on here? Because sometimes it's that you want something, and it's not that you shouldn't have it, it's just that you want it now. But you don't have money for it now. Let me tell you my method that I do anytime in ministry. I never spend money we don't have. And what I mean is get the church in debt. That's not me. You can, I'm telling you, I don't know if you guys knew this when you hired me, but I will not get this church further in debt. My goal is to get it out of debt. That's my goal. If we can be free of debt, we are free. That's a big goal for me, because Christians especially should not be living captive to debt. It ruins your life. It steals your sleep. It makes you sick all the time. It's not something God made you for. God made you for freedom in Christ. So be free and stop buying stuff that you think is going to make you happy, because it won't. Anyways, moving on. Another thing that we do this with is decisions, right? We try to rush to decisions, or, here's the thing that I've found. If you can't take 2 weeks to think about the decision, it's not worth making the decision. People are always trying to do this to me as a pastor. I don't know if they try to do it to you too. This has to be done right now. Okay, well, we don't have time to think logically about this and to weigh whether it's the right move for us, so the answer is no. But we really need to do this. Well, hold on. If we were to do that, I'd have to rally the troops in the span of 2 days for something they didn't even agree to do. That doesn't seem like a good option, because then that means I'm going to have to pick up the slack, and I don't have time to do it. I've got people sick over here. I've got this business to take care of over here. These sermons aren't even written yet. It's not realistic. And that's one of the things. We get in a rush, and we think it has to be done right now. If it has to be done right now, chances are it doesn't have to be done. The third thing that I think and this is the last of the three things that I think made Israel's request a sin, was that their attitude was wrong. So you had their motive was wrong, the reason why they wanted it. Their timing was wrong when they wanted it, and their attitude was wrong. If you read through it, it's very obvious that they're not really asking. They're demanding. This is what we want. They've got their mind made up. Don't confuse them with the details. Don't confuse them with the facts. This is what we're doing. And when you go to verse 18 of chapter 9, it says this: the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we must have a king over us. This isn't like, hey guys, what do you think? Should we get a king? No? Let's take a vote. You guys want a king? Yeah? No, it was more like this: we need a king. We're going to get a king. Get us a king. Now. I mean, I can't count how many kids I've seen do this, where it's almost like they're in love with the idea of being in love. I have to be in a relationship right now. I have to find someone to marry. Never who the person is, just that I need to be married. And it's like, well, probably not the best way to look at it. But and here's the root of why this is the worst of all three. Your motive can be wrong, and it's not. I mean, it's bad. You should definitely pray and get your motive right. Absolutely. And your timing can be bad, and God still work through things. Absolutely. But the last one I think is the worst, because really our attitude governs everything that we do. And listen to what I have to say on this one. Basically, what they're saying is, I know more than you, God. I know what I need. This is the problem with the request. The biggest of all three. This is it. God, I know what I need, and you don't. I'm not going to trust you with the future of our nation. I'm not going to trust you with my future. I'm not going to trust you with their future leadership, because I know what we need, and it's a king. That is the climax of this wrong view. And so God gives it to them, and this is the confusing thing. Why, oh why, would God give them something that's not good? Well, this actually is not the only example we have of this in the Old Testament. We're going to look at one of the other examples. Check this out. Numbers chapter 22, and we're going to read through it kind of quick, and I'll kind of say some things at the end. Now Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was terrified of the people because they were numerous, and Moab dreaded the Israelites. So the Moabites said to the elders of Midian, this horde will devour everything around us like an ox eats up the green plants in the field. Since Balak, son of Zippor, was Moab's king at that time, he sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor at Pethor. And you're thinking, who is this? Who is this person? He was a well-known seer. He was a well-known seer of the ancient world. So here we go on further with this, which is by the Euphrates in the land of his people. Balak said to him, look, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the surface of the land and are living right across from me. Please come and put a curse on these people for me, because they are more powerful than I am. Now, Balaam doesn't have any problem with the whole cursing people thing. He doesn't have any problem with sticking his nose where it doesn't go. He has no idea of the conflict, but he's going to come and tell them what's for and curse people. He has no problem with that. I may be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land, for I know that those you bless are blessed and those you curse are cursed. Now, where have we heard that before? Ah, yes, that's something that God says to Abraham, that whoever blesses him will be blessed and whoever curses him will be cursed. Ah, this is a way that the Bible, and watch out when it does this, this is a way that the Bible brings up things to call something to mind. For instance, everybody knows the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Destroyed and all that. The angels go in. The guy says, hey, come stay at my house. Don't stay in the courtyard. Well, almost the exact same thing happens in Judges. At the end of the book, there's a traveler, and the guy says, hey, don't stay out here in the courtyard. Come stay in my house. And the people try and come and force a encounter of sexual kinds. And it's very similar, the whole story. And the whole reason why is because Judges is trying to show Israel's deterioration as a nation to where they were like the Canaanites, just like Genesis was trying to show the evil of the Canaanites. So you have this kind of contrast there. Well, this is the exact same thing that's happening here. It's trying to conjure up in your memory. There was a couple books ago, before we got through all the laws, and I want to say it was before the genealogies, there was something in there that said something about this, and that's exactly why it's there. So, we go on from there to verse 12. It says, Then God said to Balaam, you are not to go with them. You are not to curse this people, for they are blessed. I'd say that's pretty straightforward and obvious. He didn't really go cloak and dagger. He was pretty obvious about this. So Balaam got up the next morning and said to Balak's officials, listen very closely. Go back to your land because the Lord has refused to let me go with you. Balaam did not serve Yahweh. Very important to bring that up. Let's plow forward. Balak sent officials again who were more numerous and higher in rank than the others, and we find out later that they also had more wealth to flash in front of him. Because he says this, and it's not really highlighted in this part, but go read it for yourself in Numbers. He says, even if you were to offer me all the wealth, and is there some in that camel there too? All the wealth, my answer is probably no. Well, let me ask God. I'll ask God again. And then the story plays out. So, okay, let's hop through it now that I've told you that. They came to Balaam and said to him, this is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Let nothing keep you from coming to me. For I will greatly honor you. To greatly honor means to financially bless and raise their status. And you do whatever you ask me. And honor you and do whatever you ask me. So please come and put a curse on these people for me. God came to Balaam at night and said, see, this is the problem. He said, God, I'm going to go have to ask God again. Did God stutter? Was it unclear the first time around? God came to Balaam at night and said to him, listen to God's reply to Balaam. Since these men have come to summon you, get up and go with them, but you must only do what I tell you. And now let's look at the very next verse. When he got up in the morning, Balaam saddled his donkey and went with the officials of Moab. But God was incensed or greatly annoyed or angry to the point of wrath that Balaam was going, and the angel of the Lord took his stand on the path to oppose him. Balaam was riding his donkey, and his two servants were with him. What in the world? Why would God say yes when he didn't want him to go? This is exactly what's happening in 1 Samuel, the exact same kind of situation. God's will is evident. They don't care because their will is even more evident. So Balaam is, the interesting thing about this, Balaam, if you read on in the story, he's eventually killed. The Israelites, as they're fighting the Midianites, and I believe it was the Moabites at that point, but if not, they were still fighting the Midianites. As they were fighting the Midianites, Balaam gets killed in the slaughter too. So he loses his life for this little act. If he would have just stayed where he was supposed to and stay out of the way, he would have been fine. It's like, for instance, when Israel was conquering the Promised Land, did you know that Israel was not tasked with chasing down every single person and killing them? They could have just left the Promised Land, just left Dodge, and be like, you take it. And they wouldn't have died. But they were too stubborn. And not only were they too stubborn, but then they armed themselves and opposed Israel. That wasn't the smartest thing to do. Meanwhile, there's these other guys who outsmart Joshua, and they say, okay, look, we are up a creek without a paddle. Let's pretend that we don't come from here, and then they're going to make an agreement with us. That sounds good. And it works, and they're saved. Meanwhile, Rahab finds another solution around the problem of God's inevitable wrath. If I help them and bless them, God surely will bless me. And that's exactly what happens. She earns salvation for herself and her entire family. Even though she was a Canaanite and a prostitute, she still earned God's favor. And the even funnier thing about that story is in the very next chapter, an Israelite man is killed by God with his entire family and all of his belongings because he didn't listen and he took something from Jericho that he wasn't supposed to. So you have Canaanites inheriting a blessing, and you have Israelites losing a blessing. This huge contrast is happening here. And so we get to hear in 1 Samuel, Balaam is completely ignorant of God's covenant with Israel. He doesn't know anything about it, and he's still lost out. A very interesting thing that I think 1 Samuel and Numbers both have in common here is that ignorance won't save us. Ignorance won't save us. There was an elderly couple who had bought their daughter a Ouija board. And she said this. She said, well, we didn't really know that it was bad or wrong, so I think God kind of overlooked our ignorance on it, and nothing bad happened. Well, that's an idea, except that it's very much so talked against in the Bible. Hosea 4:6, for instance, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. That means they did not know, and they were destroyed for it. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will reject you from serving as my priest, since you have forgotten the law of your God. Well, how can you disobey the law if you had forgotten it? And yet, I will also forget your sons. See, God gives grace. Yes. But sin grows bigger sin. See, Balaam was a part of the occult. He practiced occultic practices. And so then something bigger came. See, at some point, he knew to a degree that what he was doing was wrong. But he ignored it, and then when this opportunity came for him to get wealthy and for him to get even more prestige, he tried to convince God that he needed this, much like Israel was doing with the king. And we do the same thing nowadays. Let's say we have in our heart a heart of pride. And then somebody comes by, and they hurt our feelings, so we get bitter. The sign of pride is easily offended. Are you normally offended by people? You probably have a big problem with pride that's in your heart. As you're always offended, you're probably prideful. It kind of goes hand in hand. So then we see the bitterness, and other people see the bitterness in us too, and we say something like this: I've got a problem with bitterness. Not knowing that there's a root. There's a root in there that the bitterness came from. And so we don't look at the pride, but then we do this. Because we've gotten so used to justifying the pride in our heart, now when the bitterness rears its ugly head, now we start to justify it as well because we're already in a pattern of justifying the sin. This is exactly what's happening in 1 Samuel and in Numbers. See, they were sinning, were not interested with God at all. And then they asked for a king as though it's, hey, this is a good course of action. And then they realized too late how their bad heart has produced bad results. But they never repent from their bad heart. They repent from their bad actions. The exact same thing that we still do today. I've got this pride, but it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. So now I'm bitter. Well, okay, the bitterness is kind of a big deal, but maybe not too bad. I mean, they had it coming. It's kind of their fault. And so Balaam knew to an extent that what he was doing was wrong. And then it just got worse because bigger sin grows bigger sin. And once again, we know that the bigger sin is wrong, but we convince ourselves, and so it kind of leads over. And I will say that when you get in the rut of justifying smaller sins in your life, you're going to find that there's bigger sins that kind of start taking over. You get yourself in a rut. It's much better. I tell you what, there was this one person who was just a pain to deal with. I tell you what. Oh boy, oh boy. Oh man, you guys have all had people in your life that are similar. You know what I'm talking about. Somebody's just really hard for you to deal with. And I had the opportunity to win the argument. You know what I'm talking about. You could say one or two snide things, and fell the tree. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But I didn't. Now, I don't normally do the right thing, but I did the right thing here, okay? Kept my mouth shut and I just let it play out. And I could have gotten rid of this person, but instead, this is what I said to myself, and this is what I said in prayer. I said, God, I don't want to get prideful. And this person, it's very hard to be prideful with this person around. They just about say something snide and stupid every other day. I can't get away from them. So I'm going to keep them right where they are so that I can continue to grow as a person. In hindsight, it probably wasn't the smartest thing because they were doing a bad job and I had the opportunity to deal with it and I didn't. But I did benefit from it because I very much so did need that. I don't know about you guys, but I have a hard time with a lot of things. Pride is one of them. I have a hard time with worry, too. Worry, I think, might actually be worse for me than pride. But anyways, moving on. Our hearts can be misled. Okay? Now, they can be misled by ourselves if we just want something hard enough. They can be misled by others if somebody says or does something, we just kind of think about it. It can be misled by the situations we're in. It can be misled by Satan, absolutely. But our hearts can also be misled by God. This is exactly what we see in Exodus, where Pharaoh's heart was misled by God to harden it so that he could show his might to Pharaoh and all of Egypt. It's what he did in Numbers to Balaam. It's also what he did in 1 Samuel to Israel. Because they hardened their heart, they had to have this. It doesn't matter how we do things. Don't we do that in church a lot? It doesn't matter how we do things, just so we get the result. Like when I was cleaning the church and I was doing the pastor a favor, the whole time my attitude stunketh. And the King James, stunketh. And so our hearts can be misled, absolutely. If we are not right with God, it happens more, though, absolutely. And but here in Samuel, they didn't know that their hearts were not right with God. They had a secret motive of jealousy that they were completely unaware of. It really it brings up the question, at least, why were they unaware of this heart problem? And I would say it is extremely easy to develop a heart problem and not be aware of it. Extremely easy. I think our heart is probably the most susceptible of our entire body. It is extremely easy to get something in your heart, and once it gets in there, it's like a thorn. Getting it out is a bit like pulling teeth. Somebody can say something or do something, and it goes straight to the heart. We never forget it. Think about people you've trusted that have let you down. Think about this, okay? The trust wasn't earned in a moment. It was earned over time. But it was lost in a moment, wasn't it? See, when things get in the heart, really hard to get out. In child speak for the children in the room, when your heart gets a blast of ice to it, you can turn into an ice statue that then gets broken by a sword or some nonsense. But let it go. Okay, so what else here? Oh, I included this story because I thought it was something that you guys could relate to. There was a woman, this is a true story. She was in this church and she was causing a lot of problems. And when I say a lot of problems, I mean a lot of problems. And she kept begging and begging for God to let her go. God, why do you keep me here at this church? Why won't you let me go? Beg and beg, beg. Finally, 3 years of this. And I applaud the pastor for keeping his patience. 3 years of this, finally, she said, God is finally letting me go. Well, yeah, but did you know that God was trying to change her heart? And she was trying to not change her heart? And so problems developed. Because God wants us to move forward, and we don't want to. We don't want to. And so what we do is we live in a faithless society, and we ask and ask and ask God for something that we have no business asking for. And we live in a faithless society where we're not faithful to our family, our job, our spouse, our church, and we leave at the very first sign of any trouble whatsoever. You see, people do this every aspect of their life. They do this nowadays. Because it's easier to change your situation than it is to change yourself. We like to go to God in prayer just like Israel and beg and beg and beg for something we shouldn't have any business asking. But we don't even know because our heart is misled the whole time. We've got wrong motives. That didn't bother us. We've got wrong timing. That also didn't bother us. And then we showed our wrong attitude, and that also did not bother us. So then other people come by and they see your bad breath and they say, hey, you've got bad breath. And meanwhile, you're saying, I'm not the problem. It's you. You're the problem. So then we continue these prayers that come from selfishness. And it's not a prayer that God honors. It can happen in marriage. I'm going to mistreat my spouse, but then I'm going to expect God to answer my prayers. Well, that's a bold strategy. Tell me if it works out. Israel made up their mind. They came to ask God for a king, and God sometimes gives exactly what we ask for. It won't be good, though. It won't be good. If you wait on God's timing, it'll be good. You might have to go through some fire and some flood, but it'll be good in the end. But if you have to have it your time, your way, it's not going to be good. And we sugarcoat things just like they did. God, we need a king to stop us from doing the wrong things so we don't go to the anarchy. Okay, Benjamin was almost completely wiped out as a tribe. We obviously need a king. Obviously. It's for you that we're doing this, God. We're asking for this because of you, God. Have you ever done that in prayer? Go to God with prayer and you're like trying to convince God that he needs to give it to you so that you can do what he called you to do. Check it out though, okay? God can equip you just as you are, okay? He doesn't have to do all these dream fulfillment things for him to bring about his intended purposes. So they weren't seeking God before they asked for a king. And then when they asked for a king, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is the righteous thing to do. If they were so concerned about God, why were they not seeking God before they bothered asking for a king? Once again, don't you ever do this? Where you're not seeking God, you're not praying for his will, you're not reading the Bible, and then something comes up and now you start praying because you need him to answer this prayer. You aren't concerned about his will or his purpose or his answer back here. Why are you answering now? Well, because you want him to answer. Now it's urgent. God has to deal with this now because it's urgent to me. And that's exactly what's happening here. The perfect situation, the perfect city, the perfect relationship is not going to fix our relationship with God. We can follow our leaders, pastors, or political, doesn't matter. We can follow fame, we can follow riches, we can follow our own desires. But prayers ultimately will follow our heart. Your prayers will follow your heart. If your heart is compromised, your prayers will be compromised. And there's ways to tell, obviously. We'll get into that some other time. Are you in conflict with people all the time? Are you in debt all the time? These are just right out of the way. Are you losing sleep worrying about stuff? Just little key things there. Keep an eye out for it. Okay, so a much better option that the New Testament shows us than what Israel and Balaam and the other people that I brought up, then all that they did is in Matthew 16, verse 24, a much better solution to the problem. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself. This is Jesus' answer to the problem. Take up his cross and follow me, for whoever wants to save his life will lose it. What was Israel's purpose in having a king? Was it not to save themselves, be just like everybody else? But whoever loses his life because of me will find it. For what will it benefit someone if he gains the whole world, yet loses his life? Or what will anyone give in exchange for his life? See, he didn't say the same thing twice, did he? The first time he said, if he gains the whole world yet loses his life. And then the second one was, what will anyone give in exchange for his life? Our prayers will follow our heart. Die to self as we follow God, and our prayers will follow from that place. It will. Well, okay, that's fine, but what if I already messed up? What if I made a big decision or I did this thing and I was following not God's will but my will for my life? What do I do then? Is it all just lost? I just have to give up, and maybe it ended in a divorce for you. Maybe it ended in debt for you. Maybe it ended with the loss of your house, a foreclosure. What do you do then? It's just the end of the road, right? No. Psalm 145, 8 through 9 says, "The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and great in faithful love. The Lord is good to everyone. His compassion rests on all he has made." Please join me in prayer. God, I pray if there's anyone here that's having a really hard time in their heart, God, they're not seeing eye to eye to you in their heart. Something's gotten in there. Maybe somebody hurt them. Maybe a situation was just disappointing. Maybe it was just something they really, really wanted. But either way, they've just made this choice. And they're in a place where their prayers aren't going how they want them to. It feels like maybe you're a million miles away. They feel like hope might be lost for them. God, I pray that you touch them where they are. Lord, I pray that they'd turn their eyes to you. That they would turn their eyes on Jesus and look full in his wonderful face, so that the things of earth will just kind of quiet themselves and move to the background. Lord, I pray that the glory of your light would be all that they see, all they pursue, and all that their eyes rest on. If you're in a place this morning where you're facing a big decision and you just don't know which way to go, I'd like to pray for you if you'd come to the front, but don't come to the front just yet. Because I don't want you to feel like singled out. If you are in a place where your heart just doesn't really seem to be in tune with God, maybe you think that you've gone too far and you messed up too much, I don't know. Please come forward and we'll pray for you. Once again, don't come forward yet. And lastly, if you need prayer for any reason whatsoever, something that wasn't talked about in the sermon, but you need prayer, then come on up to the front. We're going to pray for you. And now, if you would come to the front, if you need prayer for any of the things that I mentioned or for anything at all. Now you don't have to feel like you're being judged or being in front of anybody. As far as everybody else is concerned, you're up here for prayer, and that's it. We're just going to give a couple minutes. If you need prayer, please come up to the front and let us pray for you, for anything. Lord, we pray for your guidance. If you need prayer for anything, you come to the front. I don't know if this is the day that God touches you, but I know that if you don't ask, it won't be. I don't know what God has planned for you, but I know that if you don't ask, you won't either.